Art-based inquiry studies are ideal for cultivating cross-curricular learning. Let's use George Bellows Stag at Sharkey's to show how to teach vocabulary building, writing instruction, literacy skills, and historical research in a way that is true to the art and to the discipline. This kind of art-based interdisciplinary teaching fosters student engagement and learning that builds connections and makes their thinking stronger. We begin with the art, the student, and the simple question, what is going on in this painting? Stag at Sharkey's was one of 3 boxing paintings Bellows created between 1907 and 1909. Viewing Stag at Sharkey's within the context of the series may add further insight. Some historical context can help students better appreciate what is going on in this painting. In 1896, the Horton Law legalized boxing in New York State. The law, however, did not regulate bouts, making them ripe for corruption by gamblers and organized crime. In 1900, the Lewis Law repealed the flawed act, essentially outlawing prize fighting except for fistic exhibitions in private boxing clubs for the entertainment of dues-paying members. The loophole spawned illicit fight clubs. Bars would stage impromptu bouts in their private back rooms where attendees paid membership dues instead of admissions fees. Fighters would join the club for the night to pummel other members. This farce was perpetuated when boxers entering the ring were announced as both members of this club. In her essay, Stag at Sharkey's, Joyce Carol Oates explained it this way. The canvases were painted at a time when boxing was illegal in New York State. A time, it said, when more boxing matches took place weekly than ever before or since. In these private clubs, under police protection, men of disparate ages, weights, and experiences were matched. There was no enforced regulations, no ringside doctors, of course, and referees rarely stopped fights. If a boxer died, his body was summarily dumped in an alley or in the river without identification. This is New York City, the hellish perversion of the American dream. Its slum life powerfully depicted in other, even more crowded canvases of Bellows. George Bellows explained his motivations this way. Before I married and became semi-respectable, I lived on Broadway opposite the Sharkey Athletic Club, where it was possible under the law to become a member and see the fights for a price. In another interview he explained, I don't know anything about boxing, I'm just painting 2 men trying to kill each other. You can check in with students now to see how their understanding of the painting has changed, or you can start to unpack the title. In this title, stag means a fighter who was granted temporary membership to an athletic club. But what else could stag mean? The term stag likely comes from the Nordic stegi, meaning a male animal. Stag can mean a male deer, or in Scotland it means a young unbroken horse. The term has lofty Germanic roots that originally meant male animal in its prime. Going stag also means going to a social event alone, unaccompanied by a woman. In the mid-1800s American English, the term came to mean pertaining to or composed of males only, such as a stag party, a pre-wedding party for a groom and his male friends to mark the end of his unattached life. In the 1960s, the disreputable nature of the term was further reinforced when pornographic films were called stag films or movies. So while the term has multiple readings, all these definitions center around male virility. The broad interpretation of the term stag suits this painting that explores various aspects of male identity. A great way to teach visual literacy is through direct visual comparisons. Thomas Eakin's two boxing paintings, created a decade before, highlight how radical Bellows' approach was. Have students work together in small groups to compare and contrast these dramatically different perspectives of boxing. Here are some things they may notice. Bellows evokes the fight's fury and physicality, while Eakin's concentrates on the fight's ceremony and pageantry. Bellows' painting focuses on the muscular strain, while Eakin's adopts a more psychological focus. Bellows' brushstrokes are gestural and energetic, while Eakin's rendering is controlled and realistic. In one, the space is compressed and dark. In the other, it's expansive and brightly lit. The spectators in one are a rowdy working-class mob. The other shows genteel, identifiable men. Bellows' perspective is at mob level. Eakin's is a detached observer. These comparisons really do help students look deeper. It sets them up to answer the question, how does Bellows' brushstrokes and composition accentuate the fight's energy and drama? Again, working in small groups, students may come up with these insights. The black background silhouettes the fighters, pushing them closer to the viewer. Deep shadows heighten the drama. Slashing brushstrokes create a visual energy. Blurry imagery evokes motion. Bellows applies the paint wet, causing it to blend and streak like the blood and sweat that drips off the fighters. And a triangular composition frames the fighters and the scene's dynamic energy. Students have achieved a good close reading of the painting by this point, but I beg your patience as I digress for a moment. You'll have to choose how much of this you'll want to share with your students. We've used these large triangular frameworks throughout art history to organize and balance a scene. They help the viewer take in the action in an orderly manner. Bellows was especially attuned to these visual devices and compositional theories. Bellows also had a wicked sense of humor. This comes into play in a smaller but equally significant triangular composition. This smaller triangle frames and focuses the viewer on two especially significant spectators, the only spectators shown in full face. Note how the apex of the triangle, a position of import, anchors on one fighter's groin. The spectator in the foreground looks back, welcoming the viewer, or implicating the viewer with his gaze, depending on your perspective. At first, he appears to be gesturing toward the fighters. In reality, his arm points across the canvas to another spectator. The hint of red in his hand matches the rosy cheeks of the other spectator. These spectators are also made distinct by their cigars that are prominent and strategically aligned. Extending that line suggests added significance. Okay, very funny. Can we stop? Okay, one more time. Is Bellows making a statement about the way fans fawn over male athletes' physiques and the unbridled thrill they achieve from viewing athletic feats? Bellows was an acclaimed college basketball player and baseball player and had unique insights into the fan-athlete relationship. This does not mean that Bellows bought into the Freudian phallic symbolism that saw the cigar as a representation of raw masculinity. The playfulness of this suggests to me, at least, that Bellows could be responding to the sexual innuendos common in turn-of-the-century cigar box art, but he inserts his own satirical spin in this stag environment. Certainly, the interpretation of phallic imagery in fiction and the arts has become a cottage industry. Does the framing and alignment imbue these elements with added significance? Depending on your students, the significance and intent of these visual elements may offer a fruitful class discussion. Yes, let's get back to the interdisciplinary learning opportunities. Just as the comparison of different paintings helps students to look closer and see more, comparing Stag at Sharkey's with a piece of literature can foster deep reading skills and provide a mentor text for writing instruction. There is a considerable amount of quality boxing literature, but Jack London's prize-fighting literature from the same time period offers an ideal pairing. Jack London's A Piece of Steak was originally published in 1909 in the Saturday Evening Post. This short story about an aging prizefighter, Tom King, pits experience against youth. While focused almost exclusively on the fight itself, an inner monologue explores themes of poverty and inevitable decline. In this sentence, Tom studies the veins that pump blood into his battered hands and contemplates his diminishing endurance. No longer could he do a fast 20 rounds, hammer and tongs, fight, fight, fight from gong to gong, with fierce rally on top of fierce rally, beaten to the ropes and in turn beating his opponent to the ropes and rallying fiercest and fastest of all in that last 20th round, with the house on his feet and yelling, himself rushing, striking, ducking, raining showers of blows upon showers of blows, and receiving showers of blows in return, and all the time the heart faithfully pumping the surging blood through the adequate veins. Now have students work in small groups to answer this question: how does Bellows' brushwork and London's words evoke the prize fight's energy and drama? Here are some things your students may notice. This verb-rich sentence is as action-packed and aggressive as Bellows' canvas. Like the slashing gesture of brushstrokes, clipped relative clauses punch at the page. Repeated key words and phrases instill rhythm and accentuate movement. As in Bellows' painting, the spectators are a howling mob, the focus on the fighter's physicality. Another literary link offers a chance to explore social issues that are as relevant today as they were 100 years ago. George Bellows was a frequent contributor to The Masses, a graphically innovative monthly magazine that advanced socialist causes. Its manifesto read in part, "A revolutionary and not a reform magazine. A magazine with a sense of humor and no respect for the respectable. Frank, arrogant, impertinent, searching for true causes, a magazine directed against rigidity and dogma wherever it is found." Unlike his other magazine artworks that were commissioned to illustrate someone else's text, these images stood on their own and included his own wording. Known for his sense of humor, Bellows' satirical drawings were both funny and biting. He especially directed his satirical ire at the hyper-privileged ruling elite and religious hypocrites. The images are as good for looking at current events as they are for looking at historical issues. Here are 4 illustrations in particular that are worthy of discussion. "Why don't they go to the country for a vacation?" expresses the same intolerant, unsympathetic, anti-immigrant feelings we hear about the immigrants on the southern border today. "Benediction in Georgia" highlights the racial bias in our incarceration industry, then and now. "The nude is repulsive to this man" echoes the sentiment of today's Me Too movement. The absurd hypocrisy of overstuffed men who objectify women and judge them on their physicality was not lost on Bellows. This sensitivity may have been heightened by Bellows' wife and sister-in-law, who both advocated for women's rights. Do you see a striking resemblance with some of today's political and moral leaders? Business Men's Club grew out of Bellows' early days living at the YMCA. The experience introduced him to an assortment of characters and social situations that piqued his sarcastic whimsy. This is strangely timely. While the viewer focuses on the hilariously posturing characters in the foreground, the instructor's left arm directs the viewer to an indiscretion under the massage sign. This is reinforced by another sign that alerts patrons to a social half hour in the social parlor. Bellows' gaze is both withering and crafty. Of course, class discussions could go in a number of directions with these. If you want to keep digging into Stag at Sharkey's, these illustrations offer a great opportunity to compare media and explore satire. In their small groups, have students answer this question: how are Bellows' boxing paintings different than the illustrations he designed for the masses? Student answers may include: the paintings are one-of-a-kind explorations of paint's expressive potential. The illustrations are mass-produced visual jokes. Their mocking message, not the medium, is their priority. The illustrations are satirical. Their intentions are clear. The paintings are open to interpretation. The illustrations use text to reinforce their messaging. The painting's titles are descriptive and invite reflection. In the painting, the viewer is part of the crowd. In the illustrations, the viewer is a judgmental observer. Or ask students, what do Bellows' boxing paintings and his illustrations have in common? These answers may include: both focus on common people and everyday events. Both express working class sympathies and ridicule moralizing hypocrisy. Both explore male identity. Both offer insight into Bellows' wit and wry sense of humor. My favorite cross-curricular opportunity in an art-based inquiry study is the chance for authentic, student-driven historical research. So, what first-hand resource could students use to research their interests? Joseph Pulitzer's daily, The Evening World, catered to New York's growing immigrant population and pioneered his special brand of sensational journalism. This daily introduced a sports section just as boxing was being outlawed in New York. The daily's gripping accounts, comical illustrations, and over-the-top advertisements make for fun and insightful reading and research. Now here is the real treat. The Library of Congress's fantastic Chronicling America site is an awesome educational resource. It is staggering how nimble the search function is and how comprehensive this database is. If students want to sift through newspapers, then I recommend the advanced search function and narrow your search parameters to prize fight or boxing between the years 1900 and 1920. Even with that, you'll be overwhelmed with the offerings, so further limit your search to the newspaper, The Evening World. Then, using the question formulation technique, have students follow their interests and conduct historic research that informs contemporary issues. Art-based inquiry studies are ideal for cultivating cross-curricular learning. Be true to the art, be true to the disciplines, and be true to the students' interests, and you'll be surprised where you go. Check out my website for more ideas and to offer feedback.